For 3 decades, Johnny Carson sat behind a simple desk and did something no one else could quite replicate. Night after night, he invited America into his living room and made the biggest stars in the world feel strangely human. Politicians relaxed, comedians unraveled, legends revealed themselves without realizing they had done so. Carson wasn't just a host. He was a quiet observer, a student of human behavior, and perhaps the most perceptive reader of people television has ever produced. Those who worked closest to him often said the same thing. Johnny noticed things others missed. A slight hesitation before a laugh. A micro-expression when a question landed too close to the truth. A shift in posture that revealed confidence, insecurity, or calculation. He studied people the way a scientist studies patterns, always filing observations away for later. And when it came to beautiful women, his observations went deeper than anyone ever realized. In his later years, long after he'd stepped away from the spotlight, Carson occasionally shared private reflections with a small circle of friends. One evening at his Malibu home, after conversation had stretched long into the night and the formality had softened, Johnny surprised his guests by naming what he believed were the 8 most extraordinarily beautiful women ever to appear on his show. But beauty, as he explained, had little to do with symmetry or glamour alone. He talked about presence, that elusive quality cameras can't manufacture. The kind of beauty that changes the temperature of a room. The kind that makes a studio audience fall silent. The kind that momentarily disrupts even the most seasoned professional's rhythm. Tonight, we're revealing that deeply personal list, not just the names, but the moments. Not just the faces, but the reasons Johnny Carson never forgot them. And we begin with the woman he once described as having a beauty that made time stop. Raquel Welch, the woman who owned the room. When Raquel Welch first walked onto the Tonight Show stage in 1970, something extraordinary happened, something no one had quite seen before. Johnny Carson, the most controlled host in television, paused, just for a moment, but it was enough. Those seconds of visible hesitation spoke volumes. For a man whose career depended on impeccable timing, losing his composure, even briefly, was rare. For it to happen because a guest simply entered the room was almost unheard of. Raquel Welch didn't enter rooms. She took possession of them. Crew members remembered a physical shift in the studio whenever she appeared. The audience didn't just applaud, they inhaled. Cameramen instinctively slowed their movements. Directors lingered longer than usual on her entrance shot. And Johnny, usually unshakable, found himself adjusting, recalibrating, reacting. What made Welch unforgettable wasn't just her extraordinary physical beauty. It was her complete awareness of it. Unlike many actresses who tried to soften their allure with self-deprecation, Welch carried herself with unapologetic confidence. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture intentional. She understood television instinctively. Her timing, her posture, even the way she crossed and uncrossed her legs felt choreographed without ever seeming rehearsed. Johnny admired that mastery. He once remarked privately that she didn't rely on beauty alone. Beauty might get you noticed, he believed, but understanding how to use it intelligently was something far rarer. Welch knew exactly what she was doing, and she did it without apology. Behind the scenes, her appearances caused a phenomenon staff jokingly referred to as the Raquel effect. Men from departments with no reason to be on set suddenly found urgent tasks to complete nearby. Engineers discovered mysterious equipment issues. Executives who rarely attended tapings appeared in the wings. Johnny noticed, and he laughed, but what impressed him most was her depth. Beneath the glamour was sharp wit, thoughtful conversation, and a self-awareness that allowed her to discuss her career without defensiveness or false modesty. Carson didn't reduce her to her looks, and she rewarded that respect by engaging him with intelligence and humor. With Raquel Welch, beauty and command coexisted perfectly, and Johnny Carson never forgot it. Marilyn Monroe, the woman who was never there. The most haunting name on Carson's list was the one who never appeared. Marilyn Monroe. She died months before Johnny took over The Tonight Show, but her presence lingered throughout his career. He referenced her often, sometimes playfully, sometimes thoughtfully. Over time, his understanding of Monroe evolved. What began as admiration for her beauty became something deeper. Regret, curiosity, empathy. He believed there was far more to her than the world ever allowed her to show. Intelligence, vulnerability, depth. In his later years, Carson spoke of Monroe not as a symbol, but as a missed conversation. The ultimate guest who got away. To him, she represented the collision of beauty and tragedy, and the failure of an industry to see beyond the surface. She haunted the stage without ever stepping onto it. And perhaps that's why she remained unforgettable. Sophia Loren, the woman who unsettled the master. When Sophia Loren arrived on the Tonight Show stage, she brought with her something Hollywood glamour rarely contained: gravity. Her beauty wasn't eager or inviting. It was assured, European, mature. She moved with an unhurried confidence that immediately altered the atmosphere in the studio. Johnny Carson noticed it instantly. Those who knew him well saw subtle signs. The way he leaned forward, the way his laughter lingered half a beat longer than usual, the way his hands adjusted his tie. These were tells, and with Loren, they appeared almost immediately. Sophia Loren wasn't interviewed. She was encountered. Her accent transformed even simple sentences into poetry. Her gaze held attention effortlessly. When she spoke with intention, thoughtful, occasionally provocative, always engaged. What fascinated Carson was the contrast. Audiences expected a screen goddess. What they encountered was an intelligent, reflective woman who spoke about art authenticity and the challenges of maintaining dignity in an industry obsessed with surfaces. There was tension in their conversations, not discomfort, but electricity, the kind that arises when admiration and respect exist simultaneously. Behind the scenes, her appearances were treated with near reverence. The usual chatter softened. Staff moved with care. It wasn't excitement, it was respect. Johnny admired that. He respected artists who carried their accomplishments lightly yet confidently. With Loren, he balanced attraction with intellectual engagement, resulting in interviews that felt rich, layered, and alive. Sophia Loren didn't need to perform beauty. She embodied it, and Johnny Carson felt every bit of it. Bo Derek. The silence that said everything. In late 1979, something unprecedented happened on The Tonight Show. When Bo Derek walked on stage, the studio fell silent. Not applause, not gasps, silence. It was a collective pause, stunned, almost reverent, and it lasted long enough that Johnny had to wait before speaking. What struck Carson wasn't just her beauty, but her lack of awareness of its effect. Derek arrived without polish, without calculation, without agenda. She answered questions plainly. She smiled easily. She seemed genuinely surprised by the attention surrounding her. Johnny found that disarming. He later described her as a living statue, not because she was untouchable, but because she seemed unaware she was being observed so intensely. There was no performance, no strategy. In an industry built on artifice, Derek's naturalism stood out. Behind the scenes, she arrived without demands or entourage. No lighting requests, no rehearsed anecdotes. She simply showed up. Johnny valued authenticity above all else. And in Derek, he saw someone who hadn't yet learned how to be famous, and therefore hadn't learned how to be false. She has no idea how beautiful she is, he once said privately, and that makes her twice as beautiful. Elizabeth Taylor, the weight of royalty. Elizabeth Taylor didn't appear on The Tonight Show. She arrived. Her presence carried history, legacy, authority. When she walked onto the stage in 1992, the studio responded not with excitement but reverence. This wasn't a celebrity, it was Hollywood royalty. Johnny Carson rarely altered his approach for guests. For Taylor, he did. He met her before the show. Production adjusted lighting to capture her eyes. Camera blocking shifted. Everything slowed down, subtly making space for her gravity. Taylor understood who she was. There was no false humility. No attempt to seem relatable. She acknowledged the applause with quiet dignity, as though she were accepting recognition she had long since earned. Johnny respected that deeply. During the interview, the usual dynamic shifted. Carson was no longer the sole center of gravity. Instead, the conversation orbited around Taylor's presence, her history, her perspective. She spoke thoughtfully about her career, her humanitarian work, and the evolution of Hollywood. She gave nothing away cheaply. There was mystery in her reserve. Afterward, Johnny remarked that stars like her no longer existed. Not because beauty had vanished, but because mystique had. Elizabeth Taylor represented a disappearing era, and Carson treated her accordingly. Farrah Fawcett, sunshine made human. Farrah Fawcett didn't command rooms. She lit them. When she first appeared on The Tonight Show in 1976, applause erupted so long it had to be edited down. Audience members stood. Smiles spread uncontrollably. She radiated joy. Johnny described her as human champagne, effervescent, uplifting, impossible to ignore. Her beauty wasn't distant or intimidating. It was approachable, playful, alive. She leaned forward when she spoke. She laughed freely. She followed Johnny into spontaneous moments without hesitation. Their chemistry was effortless. Behind the scenes, the energy changed when she was booked. Staff dressed sharper. Anticipation buzzed. Even Johnny seemed more animated. What he admired most was her authenticity. She wasn't guarding an image. She wasn't calculating impact. She was simply present. In a career filled with controlled personalities, Farrah's openness was refreshing. Her beauty felt connected to vitality rather than mystique, and Johnny loved that. Diane Carroll, grace with purpose. When Diane Carroll walked onto the Tonight Show stage, she brought more than beauty. She brought history. Poised, elegant, composed. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had already broken barriers and understood the responsibility that came with it. Johnny treated her with deep respect. Their conversations moved seamlessly between light banter and serious reflection. Carol spoke about her career with intelligence and perspective, addressing both success and limitation without bitterness or defensiveness. What impressed Carson was her balance. She could be glamorous without being ornamental, serious without being heavy, political without being preachy. Behind the scenes, her presence commanded quiet admiration. There was no chaos, only professionalism. Johnny once remarked that she never forced people to choose between respecting her and enjoying her. She offered both. And that to him was true elegance. Ursula Andress, beauty without apology. Ursula Andress arrived carrying one of the most iconic moments in film history, and she carried it effortlessly. Her beauty was mythic, primal, unfiltered. When she appeared, Johnny momentarily lost his place, something almost no guest had ever caused. He recovered quickly, but the moment lingered. What fascinated him was her frankness. She didn't deflect admiration. She didn't diminish her impact. She acknowledged reality without arrogance or apology. When asked about her defining cinematic moment, she spoke plainly. It changed everything. Of course it did. Johnny admired that honesty. In an industry built on pretense, Andress embodied confidence without performance. She knew who she was. She didn't seek approval. And Johnny Carson respected that deeply.